Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in case you just tuned in the first time this week, I am back. I talked about it a good deal yesterday. I'm not going to get deep into it again. If you want to check out our show yesterday, you'll get a full explanation of what's been going on with me. But the bottom line is that I tested positive over a week ago for COVID. I've had the symptoms for basically, I'd say, going on my third week now, and I'm definitely on the other side of it. As I say, I talked in depth about it yesterday, so I'm not going to go any further other than to tell you that I feel generally pretty good. I get tired fairly easy, so that's probably the biggest single thing. But I also want to tell you, after yesterday's live show, that I had a lot of people chime in on Facebook and YouTube and various other places, as well as those that know how to contact me personally, and say they'd been praying for me and are continuing to do so, wishing me and my family well. And I thank you very much. I have no doubt in my mind and in my heart that your prayers impacted my situation in a very positive way. So I'm very grateful to everyone, and I appreciate you, my listeners, more than I can ever express. All right, let's get into the show today. We're going to try to cover 3 different topics today. Of course, they're all somewhat connected. The first one is there was a high-level meeting yesterday. I'm calling it the Alaska Summit, if you will, between our top diplomats and China's top diplomats in Alaska, and they basically put a few things on the table. It was the first big meeting between the Biden administration and the Chinese Communist Party, and we're going to get into some of the things that happened yesterday. And then the GOP. Is the GOP, the grand old party, the Republican Party, are they losing or in danger of losing big corporate dollars because of what these articles are determining as voter suppression laws? Basically, what's happening at the state level is that they're trying to correct the Republican Party at state levels like Georgia and Florida, although we didn't have a huge problem here, but they're trying to correct some of the things that they see as problems that were exposed in the 2020 election. And then the craziest thing in the world here, lawmakers now are reaching out and trying to use campaign funds, wondering if they can get federal dollars themselves for things like protective gear, things they don't want you to have, like bulletproof vests and all. So we're going to get into some of the ironies of that. But before I go any further, I always have to talk about and appreciate a little and show a little love for our sponsors. We come to you live every day, Monday through Friday, or at least we attempt to, from Big Daddy Unlimited Studios here in Gainesville, Florida, otherwise known as BDU, your Second Amendment headquarters. Check them out. The best way to look for our sponsors is above the show, where no matter when or where you're watching the video, you'll see links. One of the links will take you to our sponsor, Big Daddy Unlimited, where you get factory direct pricing on guns and ammunition delivered directly to your door, including, by the way, protective gear like members of Congress are trying to get. Maybe you need to tune in and check out BDU, you members of Congress, because the Second Amendment does actually apply to you as well. Even though you don't always act like you're citizens, you are. So check it out. But Big Daddy Unlimited, factory direct pricing delivered directly to your door. And I call them your Second Amendment headquarters because they defend your Second Amendment rights on a daily basis. Then we have patriotthreads.org, apparel with a purpose. You can see a link in the same area I described as well. Remember the initials of our show, John Martin Talks, so JMT. You get a 20% discount, 20% off code on anything patriotthreads.org sells. And they They basically are a fulfillment center. They can help you with charity events and everything else. Check them out. Recoil TV on YouTube. They have their own YouTube channel, and we are archived on there. We have a channel within their channel, and we greatly appreciate it. Of course, we have a YouTube channel, spell it all the way out, John Martin Talks. We could always use more subscribers and views on our YouTube channel, but Recoil TV is all about the Second Amendment. Essentially, they could show those members of Congress that want to buy a bulletproof vest. They have videos about the proper way to wear those types of things. So anything to do with Second Amendment, Recoil TV is a great way to go. All right, let's get into the show. This first story comes to us compliments of Breitbart. China rebukes Biden's foreign policy team, cites Black Lives Matter on U.S. human rights abuses. Now, that's a picture of us in Alaska there. And we got our top diplomat there, and we'll talk about him in just a moment. Chinese diplomat Yang, and forgive me of pronunciations of these things, Yang Jiechi, or Jiechi, I think it's Jiechi. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. It just aren't that many, however you say his name. Or actually, it's a woman, I think, in my little town of Hawthorne. Rebuked U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan during a meeting in Anchorage, Alaska on Thursday, citing the Black Lives Matter movement on U.S. human rights abuses. So China threw up the Black Lives Matter movement in our face. And, that's probably pretty effective, but it's not surprising at all, considering that Black Lives Matter is a communist organization. So you have the Communist Party of China using a communist Marxist organization to hit us over the head with it. And if you don't believe me, then just take a look at this picture we have up here. Excuse me, this picture, that is Maduro, the president of Venezuela, the socialist president of Venezuela, communist basically. And the two ladies he had with him are two of three founders of Black Lives Matter. Yes, there they are, and they are abject Marxists. They admitted Marxists. It was even on their website, and here they are hugging up to Maduro. So it should not surprise you that communist China is actually promoting Black Lives Matter and using it against us. Let me just make a quick statement here, because we had a lot of things about Asians in the news lately, and the whole shootings in Atlanta and everything else. And I'll talk about them more in just a minute. But I want to make it very clear. I don't have any issue whatsoever with people of Chinese descent, people of any kind of Asian background. I don't have any issue at all. Matter of fact, I have just the opposite, a tremendous amount of respect for much of Asia. My issue is with the Communist Party of China. I am an anti-communist. I'll just put it out there. I'm opposed. Imagine that. I'm opposed to communism. Maybe it's because I actually know a little bit about the history of the world, and I actually know a little bit about the history of communism on this planet. And it's not a good one. And the Chinese Communist Party has certainly lived up to the billing of a good communist dictatorship party. And we're going to talk about that more in a minute. So I have no issue with that. I had a person chime in on Facebook from yesterday's show and ask me, like, for instance, what do I have against immigrants? Why am I so afraid of immigrants? And I told him, I'm not afraid of immigrants. Certain people I'm afraid of, it doesn't have anything to do with whether they're immigrant or not, whether they have criminal intent toward me. My opposition is not to people, and I've said this many times, not to people trying to get here by any means necessary. I understand that. I understand how great it is here, and I have a pretty good understanding of how bad it sucks down there. So I don't have any issue with people trying to get here. I'm not opposed to people legally immigrating to this country. I'm opposed to illegal immigration. And to what extent I'm afraid of it, I'm afraid of what it is doing to our beloved nation, period. But it has nothing to do with being racist. My opposition to the Chinese party has zero to do with the fact that they're Chinese. It's because they're communist. There is a difference, man. Anyway, let's get on. The summit was the first bilateral, talking about this meeting in Alaska, the first bilateral meeting between the two countries under President Joe Biden, pains my heart to say that, who has traditionally been soft, talking about old Joe, on Beijing, and has struggled to balance a desire to break with the Trump's tough policies with the need for a strong stance. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, how you could love Donald Trump, hate Donald Trump, whatever, be indifferent to him, either way. But if you're honest with yourself, now you may like what's happening in the nation, but boy, have we changed in a few short months. I mean, our border is in crisis to the fact that even old Paskey or whatever her name is, the circle back gal, the press secretary, she actually said and had to correct herself about a crisis on the border. But it's just getting crazier by the moment down there. China now we kind of had them a little bit on the ropes with President Trump. Now feels like they are the legitimate leader of the world. I didn't say the free world. I said the world. And so they are definitely on up there. But Beijing, it says here, struggle to balance, or the Biden administration has struggled to balance between being tough on China and being weak on China. Well, you know, we should not be surprised about this. I tell you, take these progressives at their word. And Joe Biden, then candidate Joe Biden, essentially said that China is no big deal. If you don't believe me, let's listen to Joe Biden, at the time candidate Joe Biden, now God help us, President Joe Biden, in his own words, describing about what threat China is actually to the United States. Check it out.
Yeah. China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. They can't even figure out how to deal with the fact that they have this great division between the China Sea and the mountains in the east, in the west. They can't figure out how they're going to deal with the corruption that exists within the system. They're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not competition for us.
Okay. So there you are. They're not bad folks unless you happen to be a Uyghur Muslim and they want your kidneys. Then they might be bad folks. Or if you happen to be in Hong Kong and you want freedom, they might be bad folks. Or you're in Taiwan and you actually want to be an independent nation, they might just be bad folks. But, they're no competition for us. Give me a break. You know the deal, Mr. Biden. But so that's candidate Biden, who was running for president at the time, basically telling you, China ain't no big deal. I guess Russia is the big deal now because Biden shot his mouth off, called Putin a killer. I'm not saying he isn't, but the way he did it was kind of ham-handed or whatever. Well, Putin has come out now and said, well, I'll challenge Biden to a debate. We could do it today if you want to. We'll live stream it around the world, ask questions, it don't matter what. I'm telling you, man, the world has their eyes wide open and they see that we got a daughter and old man there. Regardless of what you think about Joe Biden as far as his career in politics, and Sean Hannity, I got to give him some credit for this. He's done a pretty good job of showing it. You just look at Biden in the last 10 years, and there is no question the man has slipped substantially and is a shadow of who he used to be. Now, I never liked his politics to start with, but it's a fact that he is a shadow of what his former self was. There's just, as Sean says, if he ever had a fastball, he's definitely lost it. Ahead of the meeting, the White House boasted that it had successfully insisted that the summit happen on home soil. Yeah, okay, right. So the big give-in by the Chinese. Press Secretary Jennifer Paskey, I call her a circleback gal, also promised earlier Thursday that the U.S. would bring up concerns about human rights in China. So we're going to bring up concerns about human rights in China. We'll get into that in just a moment. But Joe Biden, you know, I just showed you candidate Joe Biden. Now I'm going to show you something even worse, which is President, God help us, Joe Biden, in his first public appearance a couple of weeks ago at a town hall, I believe it was in Wisconsin, where he was asked about why he doesn't criticize China. And I've got to tell you, every time I play this video, it really pisses me off. So I can't swear I won't get on a rant afterwards. I hope that it actually gets you upset as well, even if you're a supporter of Joe, because I want you to listen to what he says. He's being asked about why he doesn't criticize China, and he mentions Hong Kong. He mentions the Uyghur Muslims, or the area where they are. He mentions Taiwan and a few other things. Keep in mind that in Hong Kong, they're fighting for their freedom. They're being ghosted there. In Taiwan, China would like to blow them off the map. And in China, where they're talking about the Uyghur Muslims, they're actually harvesting people's organs and putting people into concentration camps, and women are being tortured, gang raped, and everything else. But listen to Joe Biden's response. And I remind you, this is not candidate Joe Biden. This is, God help us, President Joe Biden just a couple of weeks ago. Check it out.
You know, Chinese leaders, if you know anything about Chinese history, it has always been the time when China has been victimized by the outer world is when they haven't been unified at home. So the central, vastly overstated, the central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China. And he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that. I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the way, he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms at each country, and their leaders are expected to follow.
Oh, my Lord. Every time I see that, I pick up on something else. I want to point out something to you because, you know, right now, you're hearing people say, okay, if you call it the China virus, the Wuhan virus, you're racist. That there's racism against Asian people in this country and all of that kind of stuff. Well, let me tell you, did you hear what Biden said about Chinese values? He's essentially saying that the values of the Communist Party of China and the people of China are one. To me, that is about as racist as you could get, because you're essentially saying that Chinese people, by their very nature, are opposed to the freedom of people in Hong Kong, or opposed to freedom. I mean, there are millions of people that try to get out of China all the time, come here. We don't talk about Chinese immigration that much, but they flee that all the time. But Joe Biden in that statement is implying that to be Chinese is to support the mutilation and torture of women, because that's what's happening. He just blows it off in the Uyghur section of China, in the western mountains of China. They're actually harvesting people's organs, for God's sakes. You know, you got two kidneys. Well, you know, if we leave you half of one, how you gonna be? I mean, it's just, and he's reflecting them or bouncing them off or dismissing them as just a difference in cultural norms. Well, to me, Joe Biden in that statement is actually blasting people of Chinese descent all over the world, because he's essentially saying that if you're Chinese, you're in lockstep with the Communist Party and you support organ harvesting. Tell me where I'm wrong. I mean, please, if you're a supporter of Joe Biden, tell me, for God's sakes, defend your president. Please. I'd love to see it, because it just burns me when I hear him talk like that. But I believe what he's saying. He believes that. I don't have any doubt. But when Blinken spoke, this is back to the article talking about our top diplomat. When Blinken spoke of the rules-based international order, so basically talking about international law and how we have to kind of have a certain level of trust between nations in order for the whole thing to function. That's what he's talking about. And expressed deep concerns with China's behavior in Xinjiang, and that's where the Uyghurs are, Hong Kong, Taiwan, cyber attacks on the United States, and economic coercion toward our allies. The Chinese diplomat struck back. He objected to what he called a violation of diplomatic protocol. So basically accused us, I guess, of shooting our mouth off, and said that the U.S. could not lecture China from a position of strength. He also claimed that the U.S. had deep-seated human rights problems, and when he threw the Black Lives Matter deal up into our face as well. Well, let me just tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this you start connecting the dots. The reason why China feels so emboldened to hammer on the United States is not simply because Donald Trump is gone. I mean, that's a big part of it, but that's not the only reason. And it's not simply because Joe Biden is there. Obviously, that is a big reason as well, but it's the actual policies. See, sometimes we forget the Chinese, they know that presidents come and go. They look at things, on a much longer path than we do. And they know that Biden, heck, he's already gone in a way. But they look at the policies. I mean, what was the first thing that Joe Biden essentially did when he came into office? He basically devastated our energy independence, our energy sector. It's not just the price of gas going up, which is a tax, by the way. You're talking about not raising taxes. We could go off on all kind of tangents. But if you are paying $1 more a gallon now than you were a few months ago, believe me, that is a direct tax on your wallet. Does it really matter where the money goes? As far as it going out of your pocket, that's all that really matters. But believe this, when the Chinese saw that, any non-freedom loving person, dictators, whatever, the one thing that Donald Trump did that really sent shivers down their spine was when we became energy independent, because then we weren't dependent on China, we weren't dependent on Russia, we weren't dependent on the Middle East and the dictators over there. We could call our own shots. That is a big, big deal. And now, in less than 2 months, that's basically in tatters or on the brink of being totally shattered. And that emboldens people like the Chinese and Putin and everything else overnight, literally. China is firmly opposed, I guess my point being there, that policies actually matter. China is firmly opposed to U.S. interference in China's internal affairs, their cultural norms. On human rights, we hope the United States, this is coming from the Chinese delegation. On human rights, we hope the United States will do better on human rights. China has made steady progress in human rights, and the fact is that there are many problems within the United States regarding human rights, which is admitted by the U.S. itself. So they're bashing us. They're basically saying that they're better on human rights than we are. The Chinese Communist Party is making a case that they're better on human, and they use the Black Lives Matter again. And of course, which is a communist organization that they support, by the way. They're using that, and they're also using the fact that we're so openly talk about our problems. And basically, if you look at the Democratic Party leading into the election, I haven't said this in a while, but if I say it, it bears repeating. The way the Democratic Party has cast America is that America sucks. It's always sucked. It sucks for some more than others. And if you elect us, we'll make sure it sucks for everybody equally. I mean, they basically said United States is a terrible country over and over and over. I mean, right now, you got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were supposed to have a meeting in Georgia yesterday with supporters, and they canceled it so that they could meet with Asians which I got no issue with that. But the theme of it, the President Biden and Kamala Harris, President Kamala Harris as well, both came out and said that the shootings in those spas in Atlanta was a direct attack on ethnicity of the people there. In other words, they were Asians, and basically it was because Donald Trump called it the Wuhan flu. I mean, that's what they're essentially saying. Even though there's been no proof of that, even though and I'm not trying to put too much stock in what a killer says, but even though the suspect in this case said that it was a sexual motivation, not a racial one, the Democrats have immediately gone to trying to divide our nation up even more. So this is what we're up against. But to compare the United States with China is just crazy when you talk about human rights. I'm not absolving us in the United States of anything. But I'm about to show you a video that is a little over a year old. It was taken in China. It is a video of Uyghur Muslims being subdued, tied up, and loaded onto trains to boxcars to take them where? To have a family reunion? When people line up people tied up in boxcars, that's not normally a very good thing, is it? Tell me. Well, let me just play this video and then we'll come back and talk about it. Check it out.
Shocking vision has emerged of shackled prisoners in a mostly Muslim region of China. The blindfolded detainees are from China's minority Uyghur Muslims, a European security source has told Sky News. The footage was published anonymously on Twitter and YouTube. China has denied widespread reports of concentration camps.
Well, so what I want to ask you, with all the problems we have, as bad as we apparently, as racist as we are, of course, people are like bum rushing the borders trying to get here to this racist country. Can you find a single scene of what we just showed you? The only thing that even remotely compares to that would be two things. One would be the basic genocide of Indians, to be honest with you. You know, we didn't really line them up in trains, although we did actually take them. Matter of fact, a lot of them came to Florida and then turned around and went back they sent them to Arkansas. We have a terrible history in dealing with Native Americans in the past. We've literally committed genocide on them. There's no denying that. And then the other time would be if there were scenes similar when we rounded up Japanese Americans during the Second World War and put them essentially in internment camps and took away their property with no cause no actual legal means whatsoever. So we have our warts. There is no doubt about it. We fall short of the glory all the time and still do. But we have made steady progress, not the Chinese. And for Joe Biden, go back to that little clip I played of him as President Joe Biden to essentially compare what an American president has to do in order to form a more perfect union here in the United States and keep control. And Biden even had his fist together in China. There's just no comparison. I'm not saying we're a perfect nation, far, far from it. But I'll put our checkered past up against anybody's, anytime, anywhere. And the Chinese aren't even in this discussion when it comes to that. Back to the article, talking about our diplomat here. Blinken countered that in his discussions with allies, he was hearing deep satisfaction that the United States is back, that we're re-engaged with our allies and partners, and deep concern about some of the actions your government, talking about China, is taking. So this guy, let me get his name right, Blinken, he goes on a European tour, and he's saying he comes back, and they're all just basically saying, oh man, we're glad to see you back. Yeah, we got our piggy bank open again. We're not requiring them to pay their fair share of things like NATO agreements and everything. So yeah, they love us. The state departments of other countries love to be back in our state departments. If you remember, during Trump's first impeachment trial, one of the things that was really exposed is essentially the layers of the swamp, and how the State Department had career service people that actually thought that what they did was supposed to be U.S. policy. What they thought was U.S. policy, not what you, the voters, elected a president, in this case to Donald Trump, that was in charge to set foreign policy. No, not you, not the voters, not the person you elect, but these career swamp rats. They're the ones that are in charge. Well, they're all excited at every level because in that sense, we are back. We are back. The swamp is back. And that's what they're celebrating. But Blinken added that a hallmark of American leadership was that the U.S. was willing to admit its mistakes. I would agree with that. That it was engaged in a constant quest to form a more perfect union, but confronted its challenges openly and transparently. In essence, I agree with him. But the only thing we can't do, and we're about to talk about it here in just a minute, you can't mention, we don't say the F word on this show. We say things that rhyme with it, like mod. So you can't question openly and transparently any election mod, or you're racist or an insurrectionist, right? And of course, you can't say anything about what the pandemic. You can't call it the Wuhan or the China flu, because then you're racist. You know, even though it tried to take me out, I'm racist for even questioning where it came from. Of course, now it comes out, and I'm not even shocked about this, that we're actually involved in what was happening over there in the Wuhan flu and everything else. So nothing really surprises me, I suppose. All right, we got a few minutes left. Let's move along. I want to talk about an NBC News story. The GOP, this is their headline, not mine. The GOP's voter suppression crusade is costing them donors. And it says, this is why they won't stop. And this all goes back to, like, there you go. There's Stacey Abrams there. That's one of our local cartoonists, a guy named Jake Fuller. He does a great job, by the way. But she's, the fat lady hat sings. So this is all about her efforts in Georgia, but it's more encompassing than that. In Georgia on Wednesday, as many people around the U.S. were reeling in shock and sadness at Tuesday's mass shootings at 3 Atlanta area spas. By the way, when you talk about racism, there was also a dude shot in this that just happened to be walking by. God just shot him. So, crazy. People are crazy. But state Senate Republicans, talking about in Georgia, quietly introduced and fast-tracked a 93-page voter suppression bill. So anything that basically shores up the voting, like if you say we need voter identification, that is a suppression bill. It replaced a 2-page bill dealing with absentee voting provisions that had been set to hold hearings on, and it was designed to incorporate other controversial bills that the legislature had previously passed, as well as to introduce entirely new provisions. Essentially, what is happening in Georgia right now, with the legislature being controlled by Republicans and the governorship as well, that they are trying to remedy some of the obvious issues that came out, whether you want to call them mod or whatever, in Georgia during the 2020 presidential election year. That's what they're doing. So the state, just to understand this, and this ties all into this SB1, this big, broad election, federalizing election. Let me just explain it in a quick nutshell. Essentially, we do not have a national election for president. The only thing national about it is the date of the election itself is set within the confines of the Constitution. The states, by the Constitution itself, and this is the way our framers wanted it, set their own election laws. So instead of one big national election, essentially what we have is 50 state elections. I know there's territories and all. Just trying to keep it simple. And the only entity within those states that is supposed to change, alter, set, if you will, election laws is the state legislature. Not the governors, not the court, not the Secretary of State, certainly not a consent agreement with Stacey Abrams. The laws are only supposed to be set, changed, manipulated, however you want to look at it, by the state legislature. Well, clearly that did not happen in 2020. There's really no denying that. You don't have, it's not about mod or anything else. It's just a simple fact that election laws were changed at the state level outside of the legislative process of those states, which was the essence of the Texas case, by the way, that multiple states joined in, and that the Supreme Court basically refused to do its duty and see that. So, by very definition of the Constitution, any laws, even if they're good intended laws, that were passed or changed or altered outside of the state legislative process in any given state, whether it be Michigan or Georgia, any others, is by its very nature unconstitutional. So what is happening in places like Georgia is they're coming back and reaffirming or shoring up the election laws about, how long early voting, voter ID, those types of things. I'm not sure of the specifics of the Georgia case, but they're also talking about, just to give you a quick example, in Georgia, in order for you to have an absentee ballot, you're supposed to have a witness signature, and there was a time when the ballot had to be turned in and basically a time for it to be counted within a certain time frame. All of that was thrown asunder, changed basically under what they call a consent decree between Stacey Abrams and the Secretary of State in Georgia, that essentially opened it up to this complete mass mail-out voting with no verifications of signatures and no witnesses to the signatures, and it totally kind of wiped away the time frame. All right, just to give you an example of how bad it was. In a normal election prior to 2020, before this consent decree, the toss-out rate of absentee ballots was 3 to 6%, somewhere in that nature, that range. The average, in other words, up to 6% of the ballots were found to be not necessarily fraudulent, but didn't meet the standard. Do you know what the percentage was when there were hundreds of thousands more votes, by the way, in Georgia, or basically all over the country without this all mail-in? It was less than 1/3% that were tossed out. So that alone, whether or not, if they just did the average of what they had done in the past, which, I'm just talking about math here, would have changed the outcome in Georgia tremendously. Probably would have had Donald Trump won Georgia. And certainly there's very little doubt that the Perdue and Loeffler, the two Senate candidates, would not have had to run in a runoff election. They would have won it outright. So this is a big, big deal. And so what's happening is they're calling this voter suppression. Let me check. It says here, let me keep moving forward. It's all part and parcel of the party's embrace of former President Donald Trump's, this is according to this NBC article, false narrative that the 2020 election was stolen from Republicans because more people, particularly in the formerly red state of Georgia, voted for Democrats and turned the state blue. Well, it all goes back to what I just described. I don't think there's any doubt that the results would have been different. Would they have been enough to overturn the election or to cast Donald Trump as the winner? Who knows? But there's no doubt that there were hundreds of thousands of votes that were counted in 2020 that would not have been counted in 2016. There's just no question about that all over the country. But even as the state's Republicans were moving to suppress voter rights, their corporate donors, partly at the behest of many civil rights and activist groups, were calling on them to cease and desist, suppress voter rights. See, it's interesting how they look at that. Anything that doesn't just make voting where anybody can just literally walk in and say, hey, I want to vote today, right now. Doesn't matter who I am, where I'm from. Anything that actually like voter ID, like limiting the time for early voting. Instead of vote for a month, you can only vote for a week. By saying that the votes can only be, for instance, counted within, you got 3 days to count the votes instead of open-ended. All of that is considered voter suppression. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce, a member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which said this month that it will review its PAC donations to candidates who are continuing to push debunked conspiracy theories and future conduct that erodes our democratic process. So basically got the Chamber of Commerce crowd, both the big state one and the national one, and essentially saying, well, we're not going to give money to, they're caving in to groups like Black Lives Matter. That's what they're doing. But keep in mind, these same groups that supported Republicans in the past, like the Koch brothers and everybody else, they're the same people that brought you open borders and a welfare policy. Open borders and open welfare policy basically created the crisis that it's not just Biden. He's had help with this. The Chamber of Commerce is largely to blame for our crazy or our ignored. We actually have, this is something, I get on a little tangent here, but this is something that nobody really talks about. We actually have pretty solid immigration laws. They don't need a lot of reform. What we suffer from is ignoring them or not following them. We don't need a bunch of new laws. What we need to do is enforce the laws. In fact, as draconian supposedly as Donald Trump was, name me a bunch of new immigration laws that he passed. There aren't any. He just essentially enforced the existing ones. So our border problems are not due because we need a bunch of reform in our law. We just need to actually follow the law. But these same people, this Chamber of Commerce crowd that brought you to open borders, are now wanting to bring you open elections. That basically means that a conservative will never have a shot again. The Georgia-based companies like Coca, let me check my time. I ain't got much time left. Let's see. I'm going to read this part and then we'll move along. It says here, the Georgia-based companies Coca-Cola, Home Depot, and Aflac, all of which are big donors, have said they are aligned with the Chamber's statement, and they came out in favor of voting access. See, this all sounds good. Voting access. Another Georgia-based company, Delta Airlines, told CNN that it made no political donations. And it said in 2020, ensuring an election system that promotes broad voter participation, equal access to the polls, and fair, secure elections, which is, all this is just total hogwash. So it says here, it asks the question in this article, so what is the Republican Party without big business? Well, its elected officials and their re-election campaigns are about to start finding out. So what will the GOP be without the likes of Coca-Cola and all that? How about a party of the people, a party of working people, a party of patriotic Americans? I've been telling you that the Republican Party is ripe for being taken over by the MAGA movement completely. And this is another area we can do it. We can donate directly to candidates. We can donate directly to some things that President Trump is doing. And we can take the Republican Party over from the grassroots up. All right, I got a couple of minutes left, and I want to get into this story very quickly because it is so full of irony, and it's just crazy. It comes to you from Politico. Panic buttons and bulletproof vests. Fearful lawmakers stock up on protection. So it's not enough that they have a permanent fortress now around the Capitol, but they're actually at the local legislative delegation all the way up to senators and congressmen and women are getting scared. They're scared. Earlier this year, the Massachusetts Office of Campaign and Political Finance received an unusual inquiry from a state lawmaker. Could campaign funds be used to purchase bulletproof vests, gas masks, and pepper spray? Well, let me just tell you, if you want to do all that, you need to go to our sponsor, Big Daddy Unlimited. Check it out. So if you're a member of Congress or you're a member of the state legislature and you think you need a little extra protection, you're in the right place. You have a right. It's called the Second Amendment. Check it out. Go to Big Daddy Unlimited and get factory direct pricing on all this delivered. They probably deliver it right to your congressional office. But and on a side note, did you see where, you know what has happened since they started cutting these COVID checks? A good chunk of that money is going to buying guns. So if you want your stimulus check to stimulate you even further, check out our sponsors. I'm unabashedly promoting it here. Yet in the weeks and months after the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot, it is the kind of query that is surfacing with regularity both in Washington and in state capitals across the country. Alarmed by a growing number of threats, harassment, and scenes of violence at government buildings, lawmakers in both parties are seeking clarity from election agencies on whether they can spend campaign dollars and taxpayer money on security and personal protective equipment, everything from body armor to panic buttons at home. Well, wait a minute now. I thought that if you didn't want your house to get like a home invasion and you expected like to push a panic button and law enforcement to come, didn't we learn earlier this year that that expectation alone is white privilege? I don't know. I'm just saying. Kind of crazy. But in Washington, there's a National Republican Senatorial Committee and the National Republican Congressional Committee asked the Federal Election Commission in January for an advisory opinion on whether campaign funds could be used to hire bodyguards. You're on your own, but they can hire bodyguards, man. So I got to thinking about it, and I haven't gotten permission for this, so I'm just putting it out there. I'll have to talk to my sponsors. But maybe we could come up with some like BDU coupons or, subscriptions to Recoil magazine or something. And maybe you could purchase them and give them, instead of campaign donations, just give them coupons for buying an AR-15 or some protective gear. Let me just tell, and we'll close the show with this. I want to tell members of Congress, members of state legislature, there's this little thing out there, and it's called the Second Amendment. And just because you got elected to Congress doesn't mean you don't have a right to it. You don't need to get all these inquiries. You have a right as an American citizen to defend yourself, your life, your liberty, your property, your family. You have a God-given right in this country to do that. That's what makes us one of the greatest countries in the world, if not that's ever been. So to all you members of Congress who are feared, if you're scared, say you're scared. Just exercise your Second Amendment like every other American can, and you'll probably be all right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Talks YouTube channel, subscribe to it, all of our social media accounts. We're also, by the way, on America's Voice News. I neglected to say that today. Check them out. Our show is archived there, America's Voice News. Check it out. It's a great streaming service. But I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine, and I know you've been doing it. Thank you so much. Let's all pray for this great nation because she deserves it and needs it now more than ever. But like I say, each and every day, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.